Hello, my lovely peaches. How are you? This video is an hour and 10 minutes of speaking, an audio version of a report, a paper that I compiled. It's a paper without any paper. And this is a teaching video. This is a video that explains the various isms, racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and it defines each of those words, and then it goes into an in-depth explanation, and I touch on some scientific facts, I touch on some historical facts, and I explain why, although it's an AI voice, Davis, speaking the words, explaining why each of these things is actually horrific.
lovedreamingpeach.com.
What does horrific mean, and why these things are horrific, and why they have no place in politics? And then at the end, I discuss Ramana Maharshi, Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, and Alan Watts, along with some little bit of Bob Marley, as far as how their teachings can apply to how you can put into practical use, how you can start to learn how to recognize that whatever you are, whoever you are, however you identify, however you've been assigned, whatever culture, skin color, religion, etc., whatever genitals, whatever gender, whoever you love or whatever, ultimately we are all the same. Yes, we are all unique. One of my favorite quotes is, "You are unique just like everybody else." You are unique just like everybody else. Everybody else is unique. Many of us have similarities, and many of us like to group ourselves together and to group other people apart from us and to separate them from us, and use those separating, othering, diminishing, condescending, disrespectful, negative ways of looking at people as something to then put into political rhetoric and to actually put into law to create additional division and problems where people are being denied their basic human rights. So I recognize that the people who need to listen to this the most are probably the people who are the most adverse to it, who won't listen to it. However, I shared with my sister yesterday this Bashar video where the woman said that she's interested in sharing things on social media, but she's afraid of being judged. And his response I thought was so perfect and beautiful, which was, there will always be people, now I'm paraphrasing, there will always be people who judge you. That's none of your business. Literally, it's none of your business what other people think of you. And the people who are there judging you probably need that message too, even though they may not recognize it. So you put your message out. The ones who need it will come to it. The ones who find it helpful they'll find my page, they'll join, they'll subscribe. If you love my videos, if you enjoy this kind of content, if you find it helpful, please like, please share, subscribe. I'd love your comments and your questions. And of course, if you'd like to support me more, you can become a member on YouTube, or you can join me on Patreon, which is Cat Love Dreaming Peach, as well as Cat Dancing and Stretching, which I need to get back into. But those are the places that you can support me financially, or you can just like and subscribe and share the video. So enjoy. As I said, this is an hour and 10 minutes about of definitions, and I find it to be very helpful and educational and good information, and I wanted to take the time to put this information together to make it as thorough as I can. Oh, I will just say there is a bit at the end that's a little bit repetitive to some of the beginning, but the best way to learn is through repetition. So if you hear some stuff that's repeated, I'm aware of that, but that's part of reinforcing why these divisive and making people small, these small-minded ways of making people small, or trying to make people small, trying to make people matter less than other people. These things need to be eradicated, and the best way to start is through education. So this is my contribution towards helping people learn to love themselves, to love others, and to recognize ultimately that it is the next day. Yes, it is. Make me an instrument of peace. This is a beautiful prayer on my Buddhist flag here. Pause to read if you'd like. All right, so I just spent some time finding more quotes. I'm going to open my curtain. So, yesterday, Donald Trump did a speech where he talked about all of the lies that he's already said about Jean Carroll and her case. He defamed her again. And then he brought up other women that have accused him of sexual harassment. And he talked a little bit about their accusations about what he did to them. So I decided to go ahead, and after the clips of the definitions and the examples that I've already mentioned about the isms, I then put quotes that Donald Trump has said that correlate to all of those isms and how he is aligned with thinking that way, behaving that way, believing in that stuff, wanting to make policies to further the hate and the division. Then there's quotes that Kamala Harris has said to show how she stands up against it and how she wants to continue to fight for everyone's rights, which I think is incredibly important. And then at the end of that, there is, I think it's 45 minutes of Donald Trump's transcript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those quotes and I'm going to put it back into naturalreader.com, and I'm going to use, I think the woman's name is Emma's voice, and I'm going to let Emma read it out. So after you hear Davis reading about the definitions and examples and how it's so horrific and why it's important that it's not in politics, then you can hear about how Donald Trump is aligned with those things, how Kamala Harris is fighting against it. And then I thought it would be interesting, instead of just copying a screen recording Donald Trump in his own words, in his own voice, I thought it would be interesting to take the transcript and let an AI voice read it out and see what it sounds like there. Unhinged. And I'm very disappointed that they pushed back the sentencing from September 18th to after the election. It does make me concerned about what he will do with that time and how he will try to further his attempts to basically have a coup and overthrow the government. But I'm hopeful that that won't happen. Kamala will win. Kamala Walls 2024. and that this man will be brought to justice for his many, many, many long list of crimes. Okay, enjoy. Okay, enjoy.
Introduction. Discrimination in its various forms, racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, and homophobia, remains a pervasive issue worldwide, causing significant harm and injustice. Each form of discrimination devalues individuals based on inherent characteristics or identity. Understanding these issues through scientific and historical lenses is crucial for addressing and eliminating them. This report examines the definitions, impacts, and reasons why each form of discrimination has no place in politics. Additionally, it explores how teachings from Ramana Maharshi and Buddhist philosophy can offer insights and guidance in combating discrimination and fostering compassion. Table of Contents. Introduction. Overview of discrimination. Purpose of the report. Definitions, scientific insights, and historical context. Racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia. For each form of discrimination. Definition. Scientific insights. Historical context. Why it is horrific. Why it has no place in politics. Historical context and cultural insights. Overview of historical discrimination. Significant historical moments and figures. Indigenous cultures and gender fluidity. Buddhist teachings and their application. Ramana Maharshi's teachings. Exact quote and context. Application to discrimination and compassion. Buddhist teachings on interconnectedness. Overview of key teachings. Practical applications. Application to modern life. Integrating teachings into personal growth. Enhancing relationships and community understanding. Promoting inclusivity and compassion in daily life. Conclusion. Summary of key points. Call to action for eliminating discrimination. Horrific refers to something that causes intense fear, shock, or disgust due to its extreme nature or impact. It describes experiences, events, or actions that are deeply unsettling, disturbing, or traumatic, often provoking a strong emotional or psychological response. Key aspects of horrific. Intensity, the quality or state of being extremely distressing or frightening. Emotional impact, the ability to evoke strong negative emotions such as fear, horror, or revulsion. Unpleasantness, an aspect that causes significant discomfort or distress. Examples of use. Historical events, the Holocaust is described as horrific due to the scale of suffering and atrocities committed. Personal experiences, experiencing or witnessing extreme violence or abuse can be considered horrific due to its profound emotional and psychological effects. 1. Racism. Definition: racism is both a belief and a system that upholds the idea that one race is inherently superior to others, leading to discrimination, prejudice, and unequal treatment based on race. Racism manifests not only as hatred toward specific racial groups, but also through structural inequalities in areas like education, employment, and housing. It is important to understand that race itself is a social construct with no scientific basis. Historically, the concept of race was created to justify the enslavement, colonization, and oppression of non-European people. Eugenics, a pseudoscience, falsely claimed that certain races were biologically superior, but modern genetics has thoroughly debunked this. Scientific truth: science has shown that race cannot be determined through DNA, hormones, or any biological markers. Human beings, regardless of ethnicity, share 99.9% of the same genetic material. Skin color, hair texture, and other superficial traits are simply adaptations to environment and have no bearing on intellectual or physical superiority. There is a broad range of skin tones in every ethnic group, and no biological markers can determine someone's race. Racism against white people. The concept of racism was historically created by white Europeans during colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade as a means of justifying the exploitation and domination of people of color. Racism operates on a system of power dynamics, where those in power, in this case, historically white people, create structures to oppress others. Because white people have been historically and predominantly in positions of power, reverse racism does not exist in the same way. Discrimination against white people can occur, but it does not fit the systemic definition of racism because it does not have the same power dynamics behind it. Why it's horrific. Racism has been used to justify atrocities such as slavery, segregation, genocide, and colonialism. It dehumanizes entire groups of people and results in widespread violence, exclusion, and generational trauma. Why it has no place in politics. Political systems should be based on equality and justice. Racism in politics leads to policies that perpetuate inequality and systemic violence, such as segregation, unequal policing, or voter suppression. 2. Sexism. Definition: sexism refers to the belief that one sex or gender is inherently superior to others, often manifesting as discrimination or prejudice, typically against women and non-binary people. This belief system enforces rigid gender roles and perpetuates inequality in many aspects of life, including the workplace, education, and politics. While it primarily targets women and non-binary individuals, men can also suffer from sexism due to rigid expectations of masculinity. Historical context: sexism is deeply rooted in patriarchal systems that historically granted men power over women, controlling their autonomy, rights, and freedoms. This has been institutionalized in laws that limited women's rights, such as property ownership, voting rights, and reproductive choices. Why it's horrific. Sexism denies individuals their full humanity by enforcing harmful stereotypes, limiting opportunities, and promoting violence. It leads to phenomena like domestic abuse, the gender pay gap, and the devaluation of women's labor. Why it has no place in politics. In a political system that aims to serve all people equally, sexism disrupts the fair distribution of opportunities and representation. It leads to laws and policies that restrict women's and gender-diverse people's rights, such as denying access to reproductive health care or perpetuating wage disparities. 1. Emotional expression and mental health. A. Gender norms and emotional restrictions. Social expectations. Traditional gender norms often dictate that men should be stoic, strong, and emotionally restrained. This can lead to societal pressure for men to suppress their emotions and avoid expressing vulnerability. Impact on mental health. This emotional repression can contribute to mental health issues such as depression and anxiety. Men who feel they cannot express their emotions openly may experience increased stress and isolation. Studies have shown that men are less likely to seek help for mental health issues due to stigma surrounding emotional expression. B. Emotional isolation. Lack of support. The stigma around male emotional vulnerability can lead to a lack of emotional support networks. Men may find it challenging to build close, emotionally supportive relationships due to fear of judgment or perceived weakness. Consequences: emotional isolation can exacerbate feelings of loneliness and hinder personal well-being. Research has indicated that men who adhere strictly to traditional masculine norms may have fewer social connections and support systems. 2. Professional and social expectations. A. Career pressures. Breadwinner role. Traditional sexism often emphasizes that men should be primary earners and providers for their families. This expectation can place significant pressure on men to pursue high-status, high-paying jobs, sometimes at the expense of personal fulfillment or work-life balance. Career choices. Men might face societal pressure to enter certain fields deemed masculine, such as engineering or finance, while facing discouragement from pursuing careers in fields traditionally associated with women, like nursing or education. B. Workplace challenges. Bias and stereotypes. Men working in fields dominated by women may encounter biases or stereotypes questioning their suitability for these roles. Conversely, men in high-status positions may face scrutiny regarding their ability to balance work and family life. Research findings. Studies have found that men in female-dominated professions often face challenges such as isolation, harassment, or questions about their competence. reflecting broader issues of gender bias in professional settings. 3. Relationship dynamics and family roles. A. Parenting and family responsibilities. Expectations of fatherhood. Traditional gender roles often dictate that men should be less involved in child rearing and domestic responsibilities. This can limit men's ability to fully engage in parenting and family life. Impact on relationships. Men who wish to be more involved in their children's lives or share domestic responsibilities equally may face societal disapproval or lack of support from their partners or workplaces. B. Relationship pressures. Role expectations. Men may feel pressured to conform to traditional relationship roles, such as being the initiator in romantic contexts or the primary financial provider. These expectations can strain relationships and lead to dissatisfaction if men feel constrained by societal norms. 4. Societal and cultural impacts. A. Stigma and identity. Toxic masculinity. The concept of toxic masculinity, where men are encouraged to adhere to harmful stereotypes of dominance and aggression, can negatively affect their behavior and interpersonal relationships. Self-perception. Men may struggle with self-perception issues when they feel they do not meet societal standards of masculinity, leading to potential identity crises or a lack of self-worth. B. Legal and social inequality. Family law. In some contexts, men may face biases in family courts, particularly in custody battles, where traditional assumptions about parenting roles can disadvantage them. Social expectations. Men who challenge traditional gender norms may experience social backlash or discrimination, affecting their social standing and personal relationships. Addressing sexism's impact on men. A. Promoting emotional health. Encouraging expression. Fostering environments where men are encouraged to express their emotions and seek support can help address mental health issues and reduce the stigma around vulnerability. B. Challenging gender norms. Redefining masculinity. Promoting diverse and flexible definitions of masculinity can help men pursue their interests and passions without the constraints of traditional gender norms. Supporting equal parenting. Encouraging shared parenting responsibilities and supporting men who wish to be more involved in family life can help balance traditional gender roles. C. Education and awareness. Raising awareness, educating people about the ways sexism affects men can help create a more inclusive society where all individuals can thrive regardless of gender norms. In summary, sexism affects men by imposing restrictive norms around emotional expression, career choices, and family roles. By understanding and addressing these impacts, society can work towards a more equitable environment where individuals of all genders can freely express themselves and pursue their goals. 3. Misogyny. Definition. Misogyny is the ingrained prejudice, contempt, or hatred toward women. It often manifests in violence, degradation, or systemic discrimination that aims to control or punish women for stepping outside traditional gender roles. Misogyny can be explicit, such as in cases of violence against women, or more subtle, like the devaluation of women's voices and contributions. Cultural context. Misogyny is a more extreme form of sexism that not only enforces gender roles but actively punishes those who do not conform. It is visible in practices like slut-shaming, victim-blaming in cases of sexual assault, and enforcing dress codes that disproportionately target women. Why it's horrific. Misogyny drives gender-based violence, domestic abuse, and systemic oppression. It leads to harassment, sexual violence, and even femicide, where women are targeted for murder specifically because of their gender. Misogyny perpetuates harmful stereotypes that continue to marginalize and oppress women. Why it has no place in politics. Misogyny in politics results in laws and policies that restrict women's rights, such as limitations on reproductive rights, and promotes a culture of silence around issues like sexual harassment. For a political system to be just, it must treat women as equals, not as lesser beings deserving of punishment for simply existing outside of prescribed norms. 4. Xenophobia. Definition. Xenophobia is the fear, distrust, or hatred of people from other countries or cultures. It often manifests in discriminatory actions, policies, or rhetoric that targets immigrants, refugees, and anyone perceived as foreign. Xenophobia is fueled by stereotypes, ignorance, and the false belief that outsiders pose a threat to national identity or economic stability. Economic and social context. Xenophobia often arises in times of economic hardship or political instability, where immigrants or foreigners are scapegoated for issues like unemployment, crime, or overpopulation. However, studies consistently show that immigrants often contribute to the economy and enrich the cultural fabric of society. Why it's horrific. Xenophobia leads to exclusion, violence, and the dehumanization of people who are perceived as outsiders. It has historically fueled atrocities such as the Holocaust, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing, as well as more recent hate crimes against immigrant communities. Why it has no place in politics. Politics should promote inclusion and equality for all citizens, regardless of their origin. Xenophobia in politics results in discriminatory policies like immigration bans, family separations, or internment camps, which violate human rights and foster division instead of unity. 5. Transphobia. Definition: transphobia is the irrational fear, hatred, or discrimination against transgender people, often manifesting as social exclusion, violence, or institutional discrimination. Transphobia stems from deeply ingrained gender norms and a lack of understanding or acceptance of gender diversity. Gender identity context. Many societies operate under a rigid gender binary where only male and female are recognized. Transgender individuals challenge these norms by asserting a gender identity that does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Transphobia denies their right to exist authentically, often by misgendering, refusing access to gender-affirming healthcare, or even criminalizing their identities. Why it's horrific. Transphobia causes immense harm, from verbal harassment and social isolation to physical violence and murder. Transgender individuals, especially transgender women of color, face disproportionately high rates of violence and suicide. Transphobia also leads to discrimination in healthcare, employment, and legal recognition. Why it has no place in politics. Transphobia in politics leads to harmful laws that deny transgender individuals access to healthcare, restroom facilities, and legal protections. These laws violate basic human rights and contribute to a culture of intolerance and exclusion. A fair political system should protect and uplift all people, including transgender individuals. 6. Homophobia. Definition: homophobia is the irrational fear, hatred, or aversion toward people who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. It manifests in discrimination, violence, and exclusion from social, political, and legal rights. Homophobia is often rooted in cultural, religious, or traditional beliefs that deem non-heterosexual orientations as unnatural or immoral. Science and studies on homophobia and internalized issues. Internalized homophobia and repression. A. Repressed sexuality. Theory and studies. Research indicates that some individuals who express strong homophobic attitudes may be struggling with repressed same-sex attraction or fluidity in their sexuality. This phenomenon, known as internalized homophobia, occurs when individuals have internalized negative societal attitudes towards homosexuality and project their internal conflicts outwardly. Key studies. Hurrick, 2000 research by Gregory M. Hurrick has found that individuals with higher levels of internalized homophobia are more likely to exhibit overtly homophobic behaviors. This is thought to be a defense mechanism to distance oneself from the feared or disavowed aspect of their identity. Savon-Williams, 2005 research by Richard S. Savon-Williams supports the idea that internalized homophobia leads to increased external hostility and discrimination as individuals attempt to conform to societal norms and suppress their own desires. B. Psychological defense mechanisms. Concept: defense mechanisms such as projection involve attributing one's own undesirable feelings or traits to others. This projection is particularly prevalent in cases where individuals experience shame or guilt about their own suppressed sexual orientation. Evidence: studies like Myers, 2003. Research on minority stress suggests that the repression of one's true sexual orientation can lead to increased external hostility and discrimination as a form of psychological self-preservation. Homophobia in social and cultural contexts. A. Social conditioning and norms. Influence of culture and religion. Cultural and religious teachings often contribute to the suppression of non-heteronormative identities. When individuals are socialized in environments that denounce homosexuality, they may internalize these values and exhibit strong homophobic attitudes as a form of conformity. Research findings. Egan and Cohen, 2003 research by Lisa Egan and Joshua Cohen shows that individuals raised in highly conservative environments are more likely to develop rigid gender and sexual norms, contributing to both internalized and external homophobia. B. Anger and self-hatred. Personal discomfort. Individuals who cannot freely express their true selves due to societal constraints may experience profound self-hatred and frustration. This discomfort can manifest as anger towards those who openly embrace their sexual orientation. Studies. Glick et al., 2007 research by Peter Glick and colleagues indicates that individuals who harbor self-loathing due to unfulfilled personal identity often project their frustration onto others, leading to increased hostility towards those who openly defy societal norms. Gender differences in homophobia. Women's homophobia. Internal conflict. Women who exhibit homophobic tendencies may also be grappling with their own repressed feelings or societal pressures. The anger and frustration experienced by these individuals often stem from their inability to live authentically, similar to men. Findings. Swim et al., 2001 research by Jennifer K. Swim and colleagues suggests that women's homophobia can be tied to internal conflicts about gender roles and expectations, leading to a defensive stance against those who challenge traditional norms. Implications for addressing homophobia. A. Importance of self-awareness. Therapeutic interventions. Addressing internalized homophobia involves therapeutic approaches that help individuals confront and accept their true sexual orientation or fluidity. Programs and therapies focusing on self-acceptance and understanding can mitigate external expressions of homophobia. B. Societal change. Cultural shift. Promoting inclusive environments and challenging restrictive cultural and religious norms can help reduce internalized homophobia. Educating individuals about the diversity of sexual orientations and encouraging open dialogues can foster a more accepting society. Understanding the roots of homophobia in repressed sexuality and internalized conflict is crucial for addressing its manifestations. By recognizing and addressing these underlying issues, we can work towards reducing both individual prejudices and systemic discrimination. Historical context. Throughout history, LGBTQ+ individuals have been marginalized, criminalized, and persecuted. In many societies, same-sex relationships were, and sometimes still are, punishable by death or imprisonment. Even in more progressive countries, homophobia persists in the form of hate crimes, bullying, and discriminatory legislation. Why it's horrific. Homophobia leads to severe psychological and physical harm, including higher rates of suicide, hate crimes, and social ostracism. LGBTQ+ individuals are often denied basic rights, such as the ability to marry, adopt children, or receive equal health care. Why it has no place in politics. Politics should work to protect the rights and dignity of all people. Homophobia in politics leads to discriminatory laws, such as the denial of marriage equality or employment protections. This exclusion perpetuates inequality and harms the overall well-being of society. Historical perspectives on gender fluidity and sexuality. Throughout history, various cultures and societies have recognized and honored gender fluidity and diverse sexual orientations. These acknowledgments often stand in contrast to modern Western norms and demonstrate a broader understanding of human identity. Below is a comprehensive report on historical and cultural contexts where gender fluidity and sexual diversity were celebrated or accepted. 1. Indigenous cultures. A. Native American Two-Spirit people. Overview. Many Native American tribes recognize two-spirit individuals, a term encompassing various gender identities and roles beyond the binary male-female system. Two-spirit people were often revered as possessing special spiritual insights and abilities. Historical context. Two-spirit roles varied widely among tribes but generally included spiritual leaders, healers, and mediators. Their presence was seen as integral to community balance and spiritual harmony. Examples: the Lakota, Navajo, and Zuni tribes, among others, included two-spirit individuals in their cultural and spiritual practices, often elevating them to esteemed positions within their communities. B. Aboriginal Australian cultures. Overview: some Aboriginal Australian cultures traditionally recognized and respected gender diversity. The concept of brother boys and sister girls referred to people who did not conform to binary gender roles but were integrated into society with specific roles and respect. Historical context: these roles were integrated into cultural practices, ceremonies, and storytelling, reflecting a deep acceptance of gender diversity. 2. Ancient civilizations. A. Ancient Greece. Overview: ancient Greek society had complex views on sexuality and gender. Relationships between men and boys were common and accepted in many city-states, such as Athens, where they were seen as part of the mentorship and educational process. Historical context: the Greeks also acknowledged different forms of love and desire beyond heterosexual norms. Philosophers like Plato explored these concepts in works such as the Symposium, where various forms of love, including homoerotic relationships, were discussed. B. Ancient Rome. Overview: ancient Roman society was also diverse in its views on sexuality. Relationships between men, particularly between older and younger men, were normalized, though often within specific social contexts. Historical context: Roman culture had distinct roles and acceptances for sexual behavior, influenced by Greek traditions but adapted to Roman social structures. 3. South Asian cultures. A. India and South Asia. Overview: South Asian cultures, particularly in historical Hindu contexts, often included recognition of a variety of gender identities and sexual orientations. Historical context: Hijra communities, Hijras, a traditional South Asian community, have been recognized for centuries as embodying a spectrum of gender identities. They have historical roles as performers, blessers, and spiritual figures. Ancient texts such as the Kama Sutra discuss various sexual practices and relationships, indicating a more fluid understanding of sexuality in ancient Indian society. B. Tantra and Bhakti traditions. Overview: in certain tantric and bhakti traditions, the fluidity of gender and sexuality was embraced as part of spiritual practices. These traditions often celebrated the merging of masculine and feminine energies. Historical context: the blending of gender roles and sexual practices was seen as a path to spiritual enlightenment and divine connection. 4. Other historical contexts. A. The Sumerians. Overview: in ancient Sumerian society, there was acknowledgement of deities and mythological figures who transcended traditional gender roles. Historical context: deities such as Inanna, who exhibited both masculine and feminine traits, were central to religious practice, reflecting a cultural understanding of gender fluidity. B. Medieval Islamic cultures. Overview: while Islamic law traditionally prescribed heterosexual norms, historical records show that some medieval Islamic societies had nuanced views on same-sex relationships and gender roles. Historical context: poets and scholars from the Islamic Golden Age, such as Rumi, wrote about love and desire in ways that transcended conventional norms. 5. Modern contexts and revival. A. Contemporary indigenous movements. Overview: modern indigenous communities are actively reclaiming and revitalizing traditional understandings of gender and sexuality. Efforts are being made to restore the recognition and honor of Two-Spirit and other gender-diverse identities. Current context: these movements work towards the integration of traditional values with contemporary social justice efforts, challenging modern colonial norms. B. Global LGBTQ+ rights movements. Overview: the global LGBTQ+ rights movements continue to advocate for the recognition and celebration of gender and sexual diversity. Drawing inspiration from historical and cultural contexts where these identities were honored. Current context: activism aims to bridge historical understanding with modern rights frameworks, emphasizing the continuity of diverse gender and sexual identities across cultures and eras. Conclusion: throughout history, various cultures have recognized and honored gender fluidity and sexual diversity in ways that challenge modern binary notions of gender and sexuality. from ancient civilizations to indigenous cultures and contemporary movements. These historical contexts highlight the rich tapestry of human identity and the need for continued respect and understanding. Recognizing this history can inform and enrich current discussions on gender and sexual diversity, promoting a more inclusive and compassionate society. 7. Othering. Definition: othering is the process of viewing or treating a person or group as fundamentally different, inferior, or alien. This process often leads to exclusion, marginalization, and dehumanization. Othering can be based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, or any other characteristic that distinguishes one group from another. Psychological and social context: othering often arises from fear, ignorance, or a desire to maintain power. By dehumanizing others, people justify unequal treatment, discrimination, or violence. Historically, othering has led to segregation, slavery, and genocide. Why it's horrific: othering denies the shared humanity of different groups and creates divisions that fuel hatred, fear, and violence. It can be seen in extreme forms like ethnic cleansing or more subtle forms like everyday discrimination. Why it has no place in politics: political systems should be inclusive and promote unity, not division. Othering in politics creates a dangerous us versus them mentality, which can lead to the marginalization of certain groups, discriminatory policies, and a breakdown of social cohesion. This fosters an environment where violence and prejudice thrive, as politicians can manipulate fear of the other to justify harmful policies like mass deportation, segregation, or denial of rights. By perpetuating othering, politics becomes a tool for oppression rather than a means to serve all members of society equally. Instead of fostering understanding and inclusion, it creates scapegoats and furthers societal divisions, weakening the social fabric and promoting conflict. Summary: all of these forms of discrimination, racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and othering are rooted in fear, ignorance, and a desire for control or dominance. They are harmful because they dehumanize entire groups of people, often leading to violence, inequality, and systemic oppression. In politics, these ideologies are especially dangerous because they can be institutionalized into laws and policies that perpetuate injustice and exclusion, creating long-lasting damage to both individuals and society as a whole. Politics, ideally, should be a space for advocating equality, inclusion, and justice for all people, regardless of their race, gender, sexuality, or nationality. Allowing these harmful ideologies to infiltrate politics only serves to undermine these goals, perpetuating inequality and fostering division instead of unity. 1. Gender as a social construct. Definition and misconceptions. Gender versus sex. Gender refers to roles, behaviors, activities, and expectations that societies consider appropriate for men, women, and non-binary people. It is shaped by cultural, social, and individual factors. Sex, on the other hand, is typically assigned at birth based on physical anatomy, male, female, or intersex. The idea that penis equals boy-man and vagina equals girl-woman is based on outdated and oversimplified thinking, especially since intersex individuals who have physical sex characteristics from both categories challenge this binary view. Eugenics and race. Gender stereotypes, much like racial stereotypes, stem from a desire to categorize people into neat, socially constructed boxes. Eugenics, discredited as junk science, was used in the early 20th century to justify racial hierarchies and certain beliefs about gender. This pseudoscience falsely posited that certain races or gender characteristics were superior. Modern genetics has debunked these ideas by showing that human biology is much more complex than those rigid categories. Similarly, human behavior and identity, including gender, resist simple categorization. Legal context. Modern legal frameworks in many countries have started recognizing the non-binary nature of gender. In the U.S., some states allow individuals to mark X for their gender on legal documents, and several countries globally, e.g., Canada, Australia, India, Nepal, Germany, have legally recognized non-binary or third gender categories. Anti-discrimination laws have been expanded in some regions to protect individuals based on gender identity. Further understanding. Intersex conditions. Around 1.7% of the population is born intersex, meaning their biological sex characteristics, such as genitals, chromosomes, or hormone levels, don't fit typical definitions of male or female. This percentage is roughly the same as people born with red hair, showing that intersex is as natural and varied as other human traits. Despite this, intersex individuals are often assigned a binary gender at birth and sometimes undergo surgeries to normalize their appearance. A practice increasingly seen as unethical without informed consent. Scientific consensus. Research has confirmed that genitals, chromosomes, and even hormonal profiles cannot fully determine one's gender identity. Gender identity, how one perceives themselves, is a combination of biological, social, and individual factors. Many scholars now agree that gender exists along a spectrum. 2. Fluidity of sexuality. Sexuality and attraction. Fluidity defined. Sexual orientation is not fixed for all people. The Kinsey scale, developed by Dr. Alfred Kinsey in the 1940s, demonstrated that people often do not fit neatly into categories like straight or gay, but rather exist on a continuum. Sexual fluidity refers to the idea that sexual attraction can change over time, and people can be attracted to different genders at different points in their lives. Detaching sexuality from genitalia, sexual attraction is much more complex than physical anatomy. Emotional connection, shared experiences, and other psychological factors play major roles in attraction. The narrow view that heterosexuality, based on reproductive organs, is the norm erases the diversity of human experiences. Legal context. In many parts of the world, laws regarding sexual orientation have evolved. In the U.S., the Supreme Court's 2015 decision in Obergefell v. Hodges legalized same-sex marriage. Many countries now have laws protecting LGBTQ+ individuals from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, though these rights are still not universally protected. Historical and cultural context. Ancient Greece and Rome, same-sex relationships were widely accepted in many ancient cultures, particularly among men. Relationships between older and younger males, while problematic by modern standards, were seen as a normal and even virtuous part of life in ancient Greece. Two-spirit people. In many Native American cultures, the concept of gender fluidity was not only accepted but celebrated. Two-spirit people, who often embodied both masculine and feminine traits, were respected spiritual figures and played important roles in their communities. Hijra community in South Asia. Hijras in South Asia have been recognized for thousands of years as a third gender. They often serve in religious ceremonies and occupy special cultural roles. In India, Hijras now have legal recognition as a third gender, and some protections are in place against discrimination, though societal acceptance is still evolving. 3. Gender and sexual fluidity through history. Historical acceptance of gender fluidity. Mesopotamian and Sumerian cultures, in the worship of the goddess Inanna in ancient Mesopotamia, gender-fluid priests were often revered. They played significant roles in religious ceremonies and defied traditional gender norms. Pacific Islander cultures. In Hawaii, the Mahu are individuals who embodied both male and female traits. The Mahu were highly respected in Hawaiian culture and played key roles in preserving knowledge, culture, and traditions. Pre-colonial Africa, gender fluidity and same-sex relationships were known and often accepted in many African cultures before colonization. For instance, the Nzinga people of present-day Angola allowed women to rule as kings, regardless of their assigned sex. Colonization brought rigid European gender norms, erasing much of this acceptance. Legal and educational evolution. In the 21st century, educational curriculums are increasingly incorporating the complexities of both gender and sexuality, moving away from the simplistic binary approach. Gender studies as a field has expanded, and many legal systems now recognize the importance of protecting the rights of individuals who fall outside traditional gender norms. For example, gender-neutral pronouns, e.g., they, them, are now accepted in many legal contexts. Scientific findings on gender and sexuality, neuroscience, psychology, and sociology have all contributed to a more nuanced understanding of gender and sexuality. Studies of the brain, hormones, and social behavior have debunked the notion that people are born with a fixed gender or sexual orientation. These findings align with lived experiences that show gender and sexuality are indeed fluid for many individuals. Conclusion: the reality of gender and sexuality is far more complex than traditional binaries suggest. Scientific, historical, and cultural evidence all point to the fact that rigid categories like male-female and straight-gay are oversimplifications of human experience. Societies and legal systems are slowly catching up to this understanding, providing more inclusive frameworks that respect and protect individuals across the gender and sexual spectrum. People who cling to binary notions of gender and sexuality often do so out of ignorance, a lack of education, or an unwillingness to accept the natural diversity of human existence. Higher-level understanding requires embracing the complexity and fluidity of identity, which has always been a part of human history and continues to shape the way we understand ourselves and others. To address racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and all other forms of discrimination, Ramana Maharshi's teaching, there are no others, and Buddhist teachings on compassion and interconnectedness can be utilized to transform society. These spiritual principles help individuals recognize that the differences between us, whether race, gender, or sexuality, are illusions created by the mind, perpetuated by societal constructs, and rooted in ignorance. By applying these teachings, we can foster a world where all forms of discrimination are eliminated, not merely reduced. Here's how these insights can be implemented in daily life to create lasting change. 1. Self-awareness and inner transformation. Ramana Maharshi's teaching, Maharshi's principle of self-inquiry, encourages people to look beyond their egos, their surface identities, and even the deeply ingrained societal constructs that perpetuate division. His teaching, "There are no others," reminds us that separation is an illusion created by the mind. When we see others as extensions of ourselves, it becomes impossible to hold on to discriminatory beliefs like racism, sexism, or homophobia. Buddhist teaching, in Buddhism, the concept of interconnectedness, dependent origination, teaches that all beings are deeply linked, and suffering arises when we fail to see this truth. Discriminatory beliefs stem from ignorance, avidya, which clouds our ability to see the shared humanity in others. Understanding this helps people eliminate biases and see that others' pain is our own pain. Impact. By realizing the interconnectedness of all beings, we begin to dismantle the internal prejudices that fuel discriminatory behaviors. This leads to a personal transformation that makes it easier to treat others with compassion, irrespective of race, gender, or sexuality. Inner transformation is the first step toward eliminating discrimination in the broader world. 2. Eliminating racism and sexism through non-duality. Ramana Maharshi's teaching on non-duality, the illusion of separateness, whether based on race, gender, or nationality, can be dismantled by realizing that all beings share the same essence. Racism, which is rooted in false constructs of superiority and inferiority, can only survive when people see themselves as fundamentally different from others. When we understand that racial divisions are based on erroneous beliefs and historical constructs, we can begin to dissolve these divisions. Buddhist teaching on equality, the Buddhist principle of equanimity, upekkha, teaches that all beings, regardless of their external differences, are deserving of equal respect. This principle eliminates the justification for sexism, misogyny, and other forms of discrimination, as it affirms that no one is inherently better or worse than another based on their identity. Impact. Eliminating racism and sexism requires challenging societal structures that perpetuate these false ideas. Non-dualistic teachings provide a framework for doing this, as they remind us that the separations we see between ourselves and others are ultimately illusions. When we adopt this understanding, it becomes impossible to justify any form of discrimination. 3. Addressing xenophobia and transphobia with compassion. Ramana Maharshi's insight, xenophobia, fear of outsiders, and transphobia, fear of transgender people, arise from the perception of otherness. Maharshi's teaching that there are no others strikes at the heart of these fears. Once we understand that we are all one, it becomes clear that these distinctions are arbitrary and not based on any fundamental truth. Whether someone is from another country or another gender, they are ultimately no different from us. Buddhist teaching of compassion. Karuna Buddhism emphasizes the cultivation of compassion for all beings. This teaching directly counters xenophobia and transphobia, as it requires us to view the suffering of others as our own. By practicing compassion, we transcend the fear and misunderstanding that fuel these forms of discrimination. Impact. When individuals recognize the shared humanity in everyone, fear of the other diminishes, making it easier to understand, accept, and support people from different backgrounds or gender identities. This application of compassion, rooted in both Maharshi's teachings and Buddhist philosophy, helps eliminate the ignorance that underpins xenophobia and transphobia. 4. Homophobia and gender fluidity in a broader spiritual context. Ramana Maharshi's non-duality, homophobia is often driven by rigid ideas about gender and sexuality. Maharshi's teaching that there are no others and the realization of the non-duality of self helps deconstruct the false duality that underpins traditional concepts of gender and sexuality. Recognizing that gender and sexuality are fluid and not confined to binary categories reflects a higher understanding of human nature, one that embraces complexity rather than simplicity. Buddhist teaching on impermanence, Anicca Buddhism teaches that all things, including identity, are in a constant state of change. Sexuality and gender are not fixed categories but are subject to fluidity and evolution. Understanding the impermanent and fluid nature of all things, including gender and sexuality, allows us to break free from rigid, binary thinking and embrace a more open and inclusive worldview. Impact. By recognizing the fluid nature of identity, people can eliminate homophobia and transphobia from their consciousness. This understanding of fluidity fosters acceptance and reduces the fear or rejection of those who do not conform to traditional norms of gender or sexuality. 5. Building compassionate communities and ending prejudice. Ramana Maharshi's view on unity. Maharshi's teaching can inspire us to build communities rooted in unity, compassion, and mutual understanding. By seeing all beings as part of the same whole, we are motivated to act in ways that uplift others, rather than discriminate against them. Buddhist teaching on compassionate action, Sanskrit, Bodhicitta Buddhism encourages us to take compassionate action for the benefit of all sentient beings. This concept aligns with the goal of eliminating discrimination. Compassionate action means standing up against systems that perpetuate racism, sexism, xenophobia, and other forms of inequality. Impact. By fostering compassionate communities that recognize the inherent dignity and equality of all individuals, we can actively dismantle the systems that perpetuate prejudice and inequality. This work begins within individuals but extends outward into families, schools, workplaces, and governments, ultimately helping to build a more just and equitable world. 6. Historical contexts of gender and sexuality fluidity. Indigenous and global cultures. Many indigenous cultures, including the Two-Spirit traditions of Native American cultures, have long recognized gender fluidity and honored individuals who embody both masculine and feminine qualities. In these cultures, gender diversity is seen as a strength, and those who do not fit into rigid categories are often revered as having special spiritual insight. Buddhist teachings on gender. In Buddhism, especially in Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, gender is often understood as fluid. The ultimate goal of spiritual practice is to transcend attachment to all forms of identity, including gender. The Bodhisattva ideal encourages individuals to embody compassion and wisdom beyond any dualistic categorization. Impact. Recognizing the historical acceptance of gender and sexual fluidity helps people see that rigid, binary views are recent and culturally specific constructs. By returning to these broader, more inclusive understandings of human identity, modern societies can dismantle the biases that lead to discrimination and honor the full spectrum of human experience. 7. Eliminating discrimination through enlightened awareness. Ramana Maharshi's call for self-realization. Self-realization leads to a deep understanding that all divisions, whether based on race, gender, sexuality, or nationality, are illusions. Discriminatory systems, including racism and all other isms, lose their power when people realize their fundamental oneness with all beings. Buddhist path to enlightenment. The ultimate goal of Buddhist practice is enlightenment, which involves seeing through the illusion of separateness. An enlightened society is one in which there is no room for racism, sexism, or any other form of discrimination, because these are all based on ignorance. Enlightened awareness leads to an inclusive world where all beings are treated with dignity and respect. Impact. By cultivating self-realization and pursuing enlightenment, individuals and societies can eliminate the ignorance that fuels all forms of discrimination. This leads to a world where compassion, understanding, and unity are the guiding principles, ensuring that all forms of prejudice are eradicated. Conclusion. Ramana Maharshi's teaching, "There are no others," and the compassionate principles of Buddhism offer a clear path toward eliminating not just racism, but all forms of discrimination. By embracing the truth of our interconnectedness and transcending the illusions that separate us, we can create a world in which everyone is seen, valued, and respected equally. Comprehensive Report on Discrimination, Gender, Sexuality, and Buddhist Teachings. Introduction. This report provides a thorough analysis of various forms of discrimination, racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, and homophobia, alongside scientific insights, historical contexts, and Buddhist teachings. It also explores why these forms of discrimination have no place in politics and how the teachings of Ramana Maharshi and Buddhism can guide us toward eliminating these issues and fostering compassion. Understanding discrimination. 1. Racism. Definition. Racism is the belief that races have inherent and distinct characteristics, abilities, and worth, which justifies the superiority of one race over others. It manifests in both personal prejudices and systemic inequalities, leading to differential treatment based on race or ethnicity. Scientific insights. Biological basis. The concept of race is not grounded in biological science. Genetic research has consistently shown that all humans share more than 99% of their DNA. The variations that exist within so-called racial groups are greater than those between them. The idea of race as a biological category has been debunked by modern genetics, which demonstrates that genetic differences do not align with racial categories. Social construction. Race is a social construct used to categorize people based on physical characteristics such as skin color. This construct has been historically used to justify and perpetuate inequalities. The construct of race is not reflective of distinct biological differences, but rather a classification system with no scientific validity. Why racism is horrific. Racism is horrific because it dehumanizes individuals based on arbitrary characteristics, leading to widespread suffering, systemic inequality, and violence. It reinforces harmful stereotypes, limits opportunities for marginalized communities, and perpetuates social and economic injustices. Why racism has no place in politics. Racism undermines democratic values of equality and justice. Political systems must be inclusive and equitable, and policies that support or perpetuate racism fail to uphold these values. Racism divides societies, undermines social cohesion, and obstructs progress toward a fair and just society. 2. Sexism. Definition. Sexism is the belief in the inherent superiority of one sex over another, which leads to discrimination based on gender. It manifests in unequal treatment and opportunities based on sex, influencing social norms, workplace dynamics, and institutional practices. Scientific insights. Biological differences. While there are biological differences between sexes, these differences do not justify unequal treatment. Biological differences such as reproductive organs and hormones are not linked to differences in ability, intelligence, or worth. Social construction of gender roles. Gender roles and stereotypes are socially constructed and reinforced through cultural norms and practices. Research indicates that many perceived differences in abilities between genders are shaped by socialization rather than innate characteristics. Gender roles vary significantly across cultures and are subject to change. Why sexism is horrific. Sexism is horrific because it creates and perpetuates inequality based on gender, restricting opportunities and rights for individuals based on sex. It reinforces harmful stereotypes, leads to unequal treatment, and perpetuates systemic discrimination that limits personal and professional growth. Why sexism has no place in politics. Sexism perpetuates inequality and undermines the principles of justice and fairness. Political systems must ensure equal rights and opportunities for all genders. Policies and practices that support sexism reinforce structural inequalities and obstruct progress toward gender equality. 3. Misogyny. Definition: misogyny is the hatred, contempt, or prejudice against women. It manifests through various forms of discrimination, including violence, exclusion, and devaluation of women's contributions and experiences. Scientific insights. Cultural and social factors. Misogyny is rooted in patriarchal systems that perpetuate male dominance and control. It is reinforced through cultural norms, media portrayals, and institutional practices that devalue women's roles and experiences. Psychological impact. Research shows that misogyny affects women's mental and physical health, leading to increased rates of violence, mental health issues, and economic disadvantage. Misogyny is both a cause and a consequence of systemic gender inequality. Why misogyny is horrific? Misogyny is horrific because it leads to the systemic devaluation and mistreatment of women. It results in violence, discrimination, and marginalization, reinforcing gender-based inequalities and obstructing women's rights and opportunities. Why misogyny has no place in politics? Misogyny undermines democratic values of equality and human rights. Political systems that tolerate or endorse misogynistic views and practices perpetuate systemic discrimination and inequality, preventing progress toward gender justice and equal rights. 4. Xenophobia. Definition: xenophobia is the fear, hatred, or prejudice against people from other countries or cultures. It often results in discriminatory attitudes and practices toward immigrants and foreigners based on perceived differences or threats. Scientific insights. Psychological and social factors. Xenophobia is driven by social and psychological factors, such as fear of the unfamiliar or misinformation. Studies show that xenophobia can be mitigated through increased intercultural exposure, education, and positive interactions with diverse groups. Cultural impact. Xenophobia can lead to cultural isolationism and hinder societal integration. It affects social cohesion and undermines the benefits of cultural diversity, which can enhance social and economic outcomes. Why xenophobia is horrific? Xenophobia is horrific because it leads to discrimination and exclusion based on nationality or ethnicity, causing harm to individuals and communities. It reinforces stereotypes, fosters social division, and obstructs opportunities for marginalized groups. Why xenophobia has no place in politics? Xenophobia undermines democratic principles of inclusion and equality. Political systems must be inclusive and welcoming to people of all backgrounds. Policies and practices that support xenophobia perpetuate division and hinder social progress. 5. Transphobia. Definition: transphobia is the fear, hatred, or prejudice against transgender individuals, often resulting in discrimination, marginalization, and exclusion of people whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. Scientific insights. Gender identity. Gender identity is a deeply held sense of being male, female, or something else, which may or may not align with the sex assigned at birth. Research shows that gender identity is not a matter of choice but a fundamental aspect of personal identity. Psychological impact. Transphobia has been shown to negatively impact the mental health and well-being of transgender individuals, leading to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. It also contributes to systemic barriers in accessing healthcare and other services. Why transphobia is horrific? Transphobia is horrific because it leads to discrimination, violence, and marginalization of transgender individuals. It denies people their rights and dignity, causing significant emotional and physical harm. Why transphobia has no place in politics? Transphobia undermines principles of equality and human rights. Political systems must protect the rights of all individuals, including transgender people. Policies that perpetuate transphobia fail to uphold justice and contribute to systemic inequality. 6. Homophobia. Definition: homophobia is the fear, hatred, or prejudice against individuals who identify as LGBTQ+. It manifests in discriminatory attitudes and practices against those who do not conform to heterosexual norms. Scientific insights. Sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is influenced by a combination of genetic, hormonal, and environmental factors. Research shows that homophobia is rooted in cultural and societal beliefs that condemn non-heteronormative sexualities. Impact. Homophobia negatively affects the mental health and well-being of LGBTQ+ individuals, leading to increased rates of mental health issues, violence, and discrimination. It also contributes to systemic barriers to equality and rights. Why homophobia is horrific? Homophobia is horrific because it marginalizes and devalues individuals based on their sexual orientation. It leads to discrimination, violence, and denial of rights, causing significant harm to LGBTQ+ individuals and communities. Why homophobia has no place in politics? Homophobia undermines democratic values of equality and human rights. Political systems must ensure equal rights and protections for all individuals, regardless of sexual orientation. Policies that condone or perpetuate homophobia fail to uphold justice and equality. Applying Buddhist teachings to eliminate discrimination. 1. Ramana Maharshi's teaching, there are no others. Application. Maharshi's principle encourages us to transcend the illusion of separateness and recognize our shared essence. This understanding helps dissolve prejudices by revealing that all beings are fundamentally the same. By seeing others as extensions of ourselves, we eliminate discrimination based on race, gender, sexuality, or nationality. Impact. Embracing this perspective fosters compassion and unity, making it impossible to justify discrimination. This shift in perception can lead to more equitable and inclusive behaviors and policies. 2. Buddhist teaching of interconnectedness, dependent origination. Application. This teaching emphasizes that all phenomena arise in relation to others and are interconnected. Understanding this interconnectedness helps break down barriers and prejudices by revealing that suffering and joy are shared experiences. This insight fosters empathy and solidarity with marginalized groups. Quote, Ramana Maharshi, the self is always there, but it is not recognized because we are looking elsewhere. When one sees that there are no others, there is no need to look for the self. Context. Question. The question often posed to Ramana Maharshi was about the nature of self-realization and the perceived separation between individuals. In this context, devotees or seekers would ask about the nature of self, how to recognize it, and how to understand the presence of others in relation to the self. This quote reflects Maharshi's teaching on the illusion of separateness and the realization that understanding the true self means recognizing that the notion of others is a misunderstanding of the interconnected nature of all beings. In essence, he emphasizes that when we transcend the false perception of separateness, the self is naturally recognized, and the idea of others dissolves. Question. Student, how should we treat others? Ramana Maharshi, there are no others. Context. In this exchange, Ramana Maharshi is addressing the concept of treating others. His response, there are no others, reflects his teaching that the perceived separateness between individuals is an illusion. According to Maharshi, recognizing the fundamental oneness of all beings helps dissolve the sense of separation and promotes a deeper understanding of compassion and unity. This teaching aligns with his broader message that realizing the self reveals the interconnectedness of all existence. 1. Thich Nhat Hanh. Teachings. Mindfulness and compassion. Thich Nhat Hanh emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and compassion in understanding and alleviating suffering. His teachings advocate for being present with others and cultivating a deep sense of empathy. Application to discrimination. Racism. Mindfulness practices can help individuals become aware of their unconscious biases and prejudices. By observing and reflecting on one's thoughts and actions, people can work towards dismantling racist attitudes and fostering genuine understanding and connection. Sexism and misogyny. Practicing compassion towards oneself and others can challenge harmful stereotypes and promote gender equality. Mindfulness helps in recognizing and questioning ingrained sexist beliefs, leading to more equitable interactions and attitudes. Xenophobia. Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on interconnectedness highlight that all beings are interrelated. By practicing mindfulness, individuals can overcome fears of the other and cultivate acceptance and understanding of different cultures and backgrounds. Transphobia and homophobia. Mindfulness can aid in recognizing and addressing internalized prejudices against LGBTQ+ individuals. Compassionate practices encourage acceptance and respect for diverse gender identities and sexual orientations. 2. Pema Chodron. Teachings. Embracing uncertainty and compassion. Pema Chodron teaches about embracing uncertainty and impermanence as a path to personal growth. Her work focuses on developing compassion for oneself and others, particularly in the face of challenging emotions and situations. Application to discrimination. Racism. Embracing uncertainty involves recognizing the fluidity of identity and rejecting rigid racial categories. Compassionate engagement with those affected by racism can help in addressing systemic issues and fostering a more inclusive society. Sexism and misogyny. By understanding and embracing the impermanence of rigid gender roles, individuals can challenge traditional sexism and work towards equality. Compassion for oneself and others helps in dismantling misogynistic attitudes and promoting gender fairness. Xenophobia. Pema Chodron's teachings on interconnectedness and compassion can aid in overcoming xenophobic fears. By recognizing the shared humanity of all people, individuals can cultivate openness and empathy towards different cultures and backgrounds. Transphobia and homophobia. Embracing the fluid nature of identity and practicing self-compassion can help individuals confront and overcome biases against LGBTQ+ individuals. Compassionate practices encourage acceptance and support for diverse identities. 3. Alan Watts. Teachings. Interconnectedness and the illusion of separation. Alan Watts often explored the concept of interconnectedness and the idea that the separation between individuals is an illusion. His teachings emphasize understanding our shared humanity and the unity of all existence. Application to discrimination. Racism. Watts' ideas about interconnectedness challenged the concept of racial divisions. Recognizing that race is a social construct rather than a fundamental difference can help dismantle racist ideologies and promote a sense of shared identity. Sexism and misogyny. Understanding that gender divisions are also constructs rather than inherent differences can aid in challenging sexism and promoting equality. Watts' teachings encourage seeing beyond superficial differences and embracing the unity of all people. Xenophobia. By recognizing the illusion of separation between different cultures, Watts' teachings can help overcome xenophobia. Embracing the idea of interconnectedness fosters acceptance and understanding of diverse cultures. Transphobia and homophobia. Watts' exploration of identity and interconnectedness supports the acceptance of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. Understanding that gender and sexuality are fluid can help in reducing transphobia and homophobia. 4. Bob Marley. Teachings. Unity and love. Bob Marley's music and messages often centered around themes of unity, love, and social justice. His lyrics frequently addressed issues of inequality and called for a more harmonious and inclusive world. Application to discrimination. Racism. Marley's emphasis on unity and love provides a powerful counter to racist ideologies. His call for racial harmony and equal treatment can inspire actions towards combating racism and promoting racial equality. Sexism and misogyny. While Marley's work primarily focused on racial equality, his message of universal love can be extended to advocate for gender equality and challenge sexist attitudes. Promoting a culture of respect and equal rights aligns with his teachings. Xenophobia. Marley's call for unity and understanding across borders can help counter xenophobia. By promoting a sense of global community and mutual respect, his teachings support the acceptance of diverse cultures. Transphobia and homophobia. Marley's messages of love and acceptance can be applied to LGBTQ+ issues, advocating for respect and inclusion of all sexual orientations and gender identities. His focus on universal love supports the fight against transphobia and homophobia. Conclusion. The teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, Alan Watts, and Bob Marley offer profound insights into addressing various forms of discrimination. By incorporating mindfulness, compassion, interconnectedness, and love into our understanding and actions, we can work towards eliminating racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, and homophobia. Their teachings encourage a more inclusive and empathetic approach to interacting with others and understanding our shared humanity.
lovedreamingpeach.com.
lovedreamingpeach.com.
Attorney Roberta Kaplan, we really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much. Love being here.
What was it like to be with Donald Trump in that courtroom? He did not attend your first trial, but he was there when it came down to the money and what it would cost him. You hadn't seen him since 1996.
I hadn't seen him since he assaulted me in the dressing room. And preparing to see him was terrifying. The days leading up, as Robbie brought me around stronger and stronger, it was so, I hadn't slept, I hadn't eaten, I couldn't think, I lost my language when she was trying to prepare me to go to do testimony in front of Donald Trump. And then when we were in the courtroom and Robbie went to the lectern, she said, "Good morning, Eugene. Please state your name and spell it for the jury, for the court." And there he was, and he was nothing. He was just no power. He was zero. I was flabbergasted. And from then we just sailed through. She brought me in. She said, "Say your name." And I just looked at Robbie, saw he was nothing, and it came up from there.
Did you make eye contact with him?
Many times.
And what was that like?
He's an emperor without clothes. It's like looking at nothing. It was like nothing.
Were you surprised by that? Because the environment, no, I can, but the environment, not just from what you went through, but also the environment in that courtroom was a very different, very volatile, very heated environment in terms of both Donald Trump's attorney and Donald Trump. For it to end up like that, were you surprised?
Yes, I had been prepared for the worst force, on the earth today, the most powerful, the most effective, the most money, the richest, the most, and there he is, he's nothing. Why? It's just the people around him who give him the power. It's the emperor without clothes. It's Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale. People just gave him clothes when he wasn't wearing any. Remember the fairy tale? So that's Donald Trump.
Robbie, you're giving your closing argument, and Donald Trump gets up and he walks out. And I'm not sure if you could see him out of the periphery, right? I think your back was to him. But what did you think when you learned that he walked out?
Yeah, so it's true. I didn't see him at all because I was facing the jury and he was to my left. But the judge said something. He told the whole courtroom that he'd gotten up and left and walked out. And I thought to myself, whoa, like in a case about whether you can follow the rules or not, and you can not be a bully, not following the rules and acting like a bully is not a good move. So I thought to myself, like, okay, that's just going to give us more money, honestly.
You got awarded over $83 million from this jury. Trump's obviously appealing. He has the right to do that. Big question over the next couple of weeks, is he going to get a bond for that $83 million? If he doesn't, when could your client see that money or some of it?
So he has two choices. He either has to post a bond, it's called an appellate bond, which requires him to put down 20%, or he has to deposit, which is what he did for the first verdict, the entire amount with the court. So 83 plus 9%, so call it $89 million. If he can't do either of those, then we can start collecting right now, and we will, for sure.
Do you believe he can do either of those?
I don't know. He didn't get a bond last time, so maybe he's going to try to deposit the funds. I don't know what he'll do.
Eugene, one of the paradoxical is probably the best word I can put it, dynamics of this moment for him, for the former president, and his legal troubles has been politically, he only seems to get more powerful within the Republican Party. I understand you've been focused on the trial, but do you see that? Do you have concerns, not based on your trial specifically, but just about the fact that this person who you stared down in a courtroom has only gotten more powerful as all of this has played out, and you've won repeatedly in these cases?
It is a paradox. For him, the courtroom was not a courtroom to him. It was a campaign stop. That was clear. So we had two different objectives. Ours was to win a case. His was to win voters. We'll see how that plays out, that he's using me to win voters. Sexual assault. A man found liable for sexual assault is using the woman he sexually assaulted to get votes.
You may soon, though, have quite a bit of his money, and I wonder how you plan to use that.
Oh, it's inspiring. We talk about it a lot. We're going to do good with that money. We're going to do. Mary Trump has suggested we turn Trump Tower into an animal sanctuary, for instance. A joke. That was a joke, Poppy. No, but we're inspired to not waste a penny of this, and we have some good ideas that we're working on.
Specifically aimed at what would oppose Trump?
Donald Trump hates women. Remember the New York Magazine, the famous quote when they said, Donald, what do you think of women? He said, women, they're not worth a piece of crap. Remember that quote? And so I think one of the things we could do, seeing as how he's very instrumental in taking away women's rights over their bodies across the United States, maybe we can think about how we can restore women their rights. Use a little money for that.
Do you think of what would happen if Trump is reelected?
Oh, please. I can't think of that. I can't think of that. I don't think it's going to happen. And Robbie particularly. Tell them, Robbie, why you don't think that's possible.
I just think it's what you saw in the jury, in the courtroom from the jury, that when people are really confronted with the facts, when the rules apply, people see the truth about Donald Trump. And this isn't the first trial. He's got a lot of trials coming up before that election, and it's going to happen to him over and over and over again. And I don't think he has enough Americans who are willing to buy what he says in MAGA rallies to elect him president. At least that's what I hope.
I want to ask you, Robbie, about how Trump's going to appeal this. We have a big clue from what his attorney, Alina Habba, said. You had asked Judge Kaplan, just for some background here, to block the court or Trump's team from being able to present legal arguments about the jury's rejection of the rape claim. They found him liable for sexual abuse. I want to be very clear on that, and defamation. Alina Habba thinks there's a big chance for them on appeal because of what Judge Kaplan ordered here. Let's listen to her, and then I want to give you a chance to respond. Here she was.
Before I walked into court, that judge decided that every single defense President Trump had, we were not allowed to raise in front of the jury. It is in writing, and I encourage the journalists, the real journalists, to take the minute to look at his orders. There was no proof, and I couldn't prove that she didn't bring in the dress. There was no DNA. There was no expert. My experts were denied. Two of them were denied to come in.
Your response, Robbie, and then you, E.G. Maybe you go first because you weren't next to her. You couldn't respond in that moment. Would you like to respond now?
Alina Habba is gloriously talented. She's very skilled. She's has ludicrous confidence. And when you hear her speak, we understand that most of what she just said was entirely made up, entirely untrue.
Yeah, I understand that that's what she's saying because that's all she has to say. But Judge Kaplan, no relation, is one of the most respected judges in New York City. All his rulings were completely appropriate. The rules are the rules. He followed the rules, and now Donald Trump and Ms. Habba are going to have to follow the rules, and that's what the appellate court's going to say as well.
After the former president's win in Iowa, he gave this speech where he was very generous and unifying, and people, for some bizarre reason afterwards, were like, this is the new Trump. And then New Hampshire happened. He had a very different way of operating. After this victory for you all, he has not mentioned your name. He's not said much at all about the case. I'm wondering, is this going to be another one of those things where he does it for 3 days and then reverts back to form? Or is there a legal, when you're looking at this as a lawyer or as somebody who's been involved in this case, you say, there's a very real reason why that individual will not be talking about this ever again?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly being told not to talk about it, and he's concerned that if he keeps talking about it, he's going to have to pay even more money than he's already been ordered to pay.
Valid concern.
Right, but as the judge noted in the middle of the trial, at times he can't control himself. I mean, the judge said that to him, sir, you appear to be unable to control yourself. And if that part of him takes over, then he could say something again,
And you're willing to bring another defamation case?
Absolutely, everything's on the table.
Eugene, often many women in this country and around the world aren't believed. And a jury of your peers believed you.
Yes.
And awarded you for that pain that you have endured, and then the defamation on top of it. What is your message to other women who are not believed, who don't have the platform you have?
Well, this is why this decision bodes well for women across. It came at a time when we needed that positive, we believe you statement. So this win really was for every woman who stood up and been knocked down. Every woman. And Robbie and I are here. We have planted our flag, and we want to turn things around and make sure that women are believed.
Before listening to this near incoherent, rambling, awful so-called defense, just be aware that the reason there were 2 cases against him from Jean Carroll was not, as he claims, for publicity, but because he defamed her after he lost the first case. He continued to defame her. I think it's possible she may bring a 3rd case now because he defamed her again in this speech. Although she is 80 years old and has already been awarded $88 million combined, although she hasn't seen a penny yet because Trump is holding the money up in another appeal, which is sure to lose. Just note Jean Carroll was already rich when they met, and she has no need for his money nor publicity about this awful, horrific situation where he raped her in a Bergdorf Goodman store dressing room. Donald Trump speaks after Jean Carroll case appeal hearing. Full remarks transcript. Fox 29, Philadelphia. September 6th, 2024. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. This is a long and complicated web and story, but it all goes back to the DOJ and Kala and Sleepy Joe and all the rest of them. We have a whole rigged election system. Nobody's ever seen anything like what's happening now. I understand yesterday they bring up Russia again, that they've done for years, never found anything, but they should be looking at China, Iran, lots of other places. I haven't spoken to anybody from Russia in years. They know that, but it's a scam. But it all goes back to the DOJ because we had a trial today. It's an appeal of a ridiculous verdict of a woman I have never met. I don't know. I have no idea who she is. She wrote a book, and she made a ridiculous story up. She put it in her book, and we're now appealing the decision. We had an extremely hostile judge appointed by Clinton, very good friends of Clinton. I guess he presided over the marriage ceremony of one of the lawyers on the case against us, and a very sad judge, Lewis Kaplan, angry man. He was so angry. I went to the trial. I've been in a lot of litigation over the years. I've never seen such anger, or wanted to throw one of our attorneys in jail, who threatened her with jail. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Over nothing. I've never seen such anger. But all of our judges, we had a brilliant judge, and I think a very fair judge in Florida. I think we have another judge who's very fair. I just asked for fair. I don't want anything different from anybody else. I just asked for fairness. We have another judge, or a couple of judges, that I think are fair. Then we have other judges that I think the whole thing is, I think the system is a disgrace. The case that we met on today, and then we're going to talk about job numbers, which are horrible, by the way, horrible, like really bad. And you know that I'm sure you won't report on it, but the job numbers are terrible. We're going to talk about the appeal today. We had a great appellant lawyer go down representing us, and I think John did a very good job. You have a matter of minutes to speak. It's a very complex thing because it was a setup, a rigged deal. They had 2 witnesses, and before I start, I have no idea who this woman is. They have a picture from, they say, about 40 years ago, a picture, and the picture depicts her and her husband on a celebrity line where I was the celebrity. I was been a celebrity for a long time, and they were shaking my hands along with hundreds of other people. Nobody even knows where it is. The problem is she doesn't know the date of this incident. She doesn't know when. She doesn't know, was it in the 90s? Could it have been further than that? She has no idea when, and people do that. Because you don't want to give a specific date, and then you find out that Trump or whoever it was in Europe, so they tend to do that. They take long periods, so that this way, hopefully, he was in New York at that time. But this is a disgraceful case, and disgraceful in particular because it's about a former president of the United States who is now leading in the polls to be the president again, and this is being worked with the DOJ, Department of Justice, as are all of these cases. They all come out Atlanta funny. That is all Department of Justice. Nobody knew that of the case with Judge Gorin, the most overturned judge in the state, that is very close because they sent their team from at the DOJ to help him, the district attorney Alvin Bragg, that was all worked with. Again, they sent a top operative from the department, from the DOJ Department of, I call it the Department of Injustice, because they're using the Department of Justice to rig the campaign. These cases are disgraceful now. They're being brought for the most part in front of very hostile areas where Republicans get 3 or 4%, like downtown Manhattan, in front of very hostile judges, like hostile like you wouldn't believe. Judge Marin, Judge Morin, and Judge Kaplan, all of them hostile areas, and a very, very hostile judges. I've never seen anything like it, and very bad thing in this case, New York, very bad thing for New York businesses won't come to New York because of what took place with Judge Morin. I can tell you that, and probably the rest of them also, but this case involved a woman who wrote a book, and I guess she said something in the book. That's when I first heard about it in the White House, and of course I denied the story because it's not true. I have no idea who the woman is. And I never met her. Now I don't know about a picture that was taken 40 years ago with her husband on a celebrity line, so I don't think that counts. But as far as I know, I never met her. I never touched her. I would have had no interest in meeting her in any way, shape, or form. Her husband was a news anchor, actually John Johnson, a very nice guy. She called him horrible things. We weren't allowed to say that in the trial. She said horrible things about him. I guess they're since divorced. He's a very nice guy, African American, and she said very bad things. We weren't allowed to use that in the trial, which surprised a lot of people. But she made up a story. It fabricated 100% that I attacked her at Bergdorf Goodman. You know, it's very interesting. I don't think they were allowed to use this either. Her favorite show is Law and Order, and there's an almost exact story as her story in Law and Order about being attacked in the dressing room of a department. So I don't know if they used the name of the store, but that's her favorite show, Law and Order. She said that, and anyway, this evolved into a defamation case against me because I disputed her words, because I told the truth. We were called. I was in the White House, and I said, no, it never happened. I didn't even know what they were talking about. This was, I think I was in the Oval Office. Sir, do you know anything about this? And this had to do with a book, and she had a few pages in a book making this claim. By the way, there was never a claim. There was never a police report. There was never anything mentioned. There was never publicity 30 or 40 years ago. Whenever it took place, nobody knows. She doesn't know when it took place. When did it take place? She has no idea. She thinks it was in the 1990s. She thinks it was in the 1990s. And the judge, we had 2 trials. We asked for consolidation. He said no. The reason he said no is he'd rather have double the publicity, because that's bad for me, very bad, because I'm running for president, and this is not the kind of publicity you like, and whether it's true or not, it's horrible. And in this case, it's so false. It's a made-up, fabricated story by somebody, I think, initially just looking to promote a book. And when they called me, I denied the story, got sued essentially for defamation, because I'm denying a story where I'm right. I should be suing her for defamation. So that's
You got sued
where it
for
is now. There
defamation
were 2
because you denied
witnesses.
a
One
story
is a
that was
woman who's
true.
followed me for
You
years.
liar.
She said in 1979, I was in an airplane with her commercial flight, and we became very intimate. I just sat down. I think I had the book, The Art of the Deal. I was famous then too. I've been famous for a long time, and we're sitting in first class. According to her, never happened, by the way, totally made up story. She's a Clinton person too, by the way, big Clinton person. She made up the story, and so many years ago. And I think it would be 1979. One of my many people behind me could correct it, but I think she said 197. That's a long time ago. And I sat down. I believe I had some pretty big success then, and I was being talked about a lot. Maybe The Art of the Deal was out, sometime after that. I'm not sure. But I was well known, and passengers were coming into the plane, and she said I was making out with her. And then after 15 minutes, and then she changed her story of a couple of times, maybe it was quicker, that I grabbed her at a certain part, and that was when she would not have been the chosen one. She would not have been the chosen one. She has gone around for years saying this story everywhere I go. She says this story, and it's a total lie. And now I assume she'll sue me now for defamation, like I got sued by Jean Carroll, who interestingly said she's been hurt, damaged, but she's made more money since She did this than she ever made in her life. She gets paid a lot of money to go talking bad things about me. So remember this whole thing started along with just about every other case I'm involved with the political campaign of Harris, and who's having a bad time because she can't talk of Harris and Joe Biden. This was election interference at all, as it's all fabricated, but fabricated in front of very friendly judges for them and in very friendly areas for them. If you get a jury, it's very hard to win in a jury where you have 3 or 4 or 5% Republican votes. Very tough. Actually, 2 witnesses. One is named Jessica Leeds, so she was up again. Can't get rid of her. She was up. She said, I was in an airplane doing that. A couple of things. You have an armrest. And planes back in those days. Oh, by the way, she didn't know anything about the flight where we were going, where I was in very few flights. I was a New York guy building New York building. I was Sid. Very few airplanes, I will tell you, in those days. 197.9, I think it's a long time ago, but you had the armrest, and in the old days they didn't move okay. But she said she then got out and she went to the back of the plane, and that was the end of the story. I think, and this story has followed me for years. But just to finish with her, Jessica Leeds, no police reports, no witnesses, no corroboration of any kind, no criminal suggestions, no nothing. Then you have another one, and this one is a writer for People magazine who I actually thought was very nice. She came to Mar-a-Lago and she wrote the most beautiful story you've ever seen. It was a love story about Melania and myself, a love story in People magazine, and that was it. It was a cover, I think, but it was a beautiful story. Everybody would love to have that marriage. She said the nicest things about me, about Melania. You have the story. I mean, you can read the story, and her name was whoever. Let's see her name. Where Hoof Soroff. Yeah. I don't have it, whatever her name was. I don't know the lady, so perhaps it's much better that way, but I really don't know the lady. So she wrote this beautiful story, and about, I don't know, years later. No police reports, no anything. Years later, the same person they called up. Did you attack at Mar-a-Lago this woman, this writer, whatever her name is, and she was a witness in a case her and Leeds with the 2 witnesses, only 2 witnesses. Did you attack her? I said, who is she? And they said she writes for People magazine. I said, I don't know anything about the lady. If I had a story long ago, years before, about People, but it was a very nice story, so I don't know, has to be made up because I don't know what you're talking about. It turned out that the same lady that wrote this beautiful story years later said I attacked her. Now think of this. Oh, and she said the butler knew everything. The old expression, the butler did it right, very famous in crime stories. Well, the butler was Tony Sinnell. Worked for me for a long time. He was retired at that time. That was years later. He retired. Was it retired when this hoax came out? And what happened is he totally confirmed my story, and he didn't even work for me anymore. He passed away a couple of years ago. A good man. He said the woman was crazy. It never happened. I was the one that served her whatever she was drinking, and I was there, and nothing ever happened. But you don't need the butler. All you have to do is read the story. Think of this. A woman comes into Mar-a-Lago, interviews me about a love story about my wife and myself, and during that interview I attacked her and pushed her up against the wall violently. Okay, and then she leaves and she writes a perfect story, a perfect story. She doesn't mention the event again. There's nothing on file at all. 0. There was no complaints. There were no complaints to People magazine. There was no witness. There was nothing. Yeah, well, there was a witness, the butler, and he's already said everything. He's already told this story, because this story, likewise, like Leeds, this story has followed me around. I could go through many other stories outside of this. It's very funny when you're rich and famous. You get a lot of people come up with a lot of stories, but you're writers, and some of you are legitimate writers, and some of you aren't. Some of you are fake
Funny, huh?
news, and some of you are real news. But put yourself in my position. I'm running for president, and I have all these cases all of a sudden come out, and they have fake cases, and they report back to
Not fake.
DOJ, and you have Lisa Monaco, one of the people at DOJ, who I saw the other day talking about the Russia hooks, and yet she's friends with Andrew Weissman and that whole group and crew, who should be sued, by the way, because they're not a charity. All they are is a political organization that goes after Trump for the last 8 years. I mean, he's a sick person that runs that too. But Lisa Monaco is in the Department of Justice, but she's an Andrew Weissman person who's been after me for years. So far, he's failed, and he's having a heart attack because I'm leading in the polls. I guess if
No, you're
you
not.
look at the Nate Seela, very respected guy. I don't know him, but he has me up by a lot. So let's say we're leading, or let's say we're tied, or let's say what difference I'm in the race. It's between 2 people, but I think we're leading by a lot because the opponent refused Cheese to do an interview because she can't talk, and they're not going to skate through it. I'm not going to have a Marxist president. The people are getting it. So we go down to court today to talk about this case is a scam, and all I can say is that I never met the woman other than this picture, which could have been AI.
Liar. lying.
Generated, I don't know, showed up out of nowhere, but it's fine, nice picture with her husband, and lots of other people are online. It's a celebrity lying, but never met her, never touched her, never had anything to do with her. The other thing is I was very famous then. If I would have walked into Bergdorf Goodman, the department store that she said, everybody would have said, oh, there's Trump, and it would have been at that time on page 6. Page 6 was the equivalent of today's internet, and it would have been a big story if I would have walked into that store, gone into a dressing room, and supposedly, you know what to her never happened, total phony story. And I feel sad that I have to come up here and explain it. I have all this legal talent, but legal talent cannot overcome rigged judges. They can't overcome a 4% Republican area, and I'm disappointed in my legal talent. I'll be honest with you, they're good people, they're talented people. Today at the trial, they didn't mention the dress, so the Monica Lewinsky type dress was a big part of the trial, big part of the trial. I said, why didn't you mention that? And I heard there was a dress involved. And I wasn't frightened at all because I did nothing with her, never touched this woman, saw this woman, knew, had no idea who she was. But they have a dress, sir. I said, so what? Well, sir, it's very yes. They used that dress to try and intimidate me. They aired that dress with the public. That dress was such a famous dress. It was Monica Lewinsky Part 2 the dress, and the judge wanted it for trial, and it was going to go into trial. And then they found out there was nothing on the dress, which I knew, and then the judge wouldn't allow it to be used, so they used it as a cudgel. They used it as a hammer over my head. And then the judge, when he heard that it showed totally negative, the judge wouldn't allow us to use it at trial. Then there was an Anderson Cooper interview where she said essentially, no, he didn't rape me. She was selling her book. She wrote a book. The book would have been a total failure. Probably was anywhere, though, probably sold more recently. Again, there's a woman that wasn't doing well until she came out with this stuff about me, and that's happened to others too, by the way. She's not the only one, but they have the Anderson Cooper tape, and in the Anderson Cooper tape, it's an interview of her, and Cooper says something to the effect, did he rape you? Did he rape you? He was so happy. Oh, did he rape you? And she gave a very good answer for me, but a bad answer for CNN, for Anderson. And he said, we're going to commercial break right now. We're going. Then she came back from commercial break, and she was much more hostile, but this man wouldn't let us use the tape or the proper questions having to do with the tape. Wouldn't let us. The Judge Kaplan wouldn't let it be used. We wanted to get the outtakes. In other words, what did Anderson Cooper talk
Mother effer
to her about during that intermission for a commercial that he called for immediately? Why do you see this? I mean, some of you have seen it, some of you haven't. We're going to commercial break right now. And so what happened is we weren't able to use it. The other thing is we had not one trial, we had two trials. Nobody understands why we asked for a consolidation.
Because
and I wanted to show
lied,
up to the trial
and
too.
then after you lost,
The first trial, my lawyer, who's not up here, not with us any longer,
That's
so
why
you
you
should
had
not
two
show up to the
trials.
former president or the president. I don't even know when the trial was, but you're
yes,
the
you do.
President of the United
fled to
States, sir. This is
Scotland the
beneath
first
you.
time.
I've got this 100%. The dress is negative, but he wasn't able to use it, sir. It's
That's
beneath you
not
to show
true.
up, I said. But wouldn't that be bad for a jury? Wouldn't that be such a bad for a jury? If I don't do, he said, sir, you don't have to show up. I've got this. You shouldn't do it. It's beneath you. It's beneath the office of the president. I understood what he meant by that. And so I didn't show up, and I was found guilty of something that I didn't do with a woman that I have never seen, touched,
you
or
do
in
it.
any way was involved with,
Yes,
nor
you
would I want
did.
to be I.
Are her.
Would not want to be. My people said, please don't say that I would not want to be involved with her. And that's where we are. So we're appealing it, and people would say it's not a friendly panel based on the appointments, but you'll look that up yourself. But I hope they understand this is the office of the President of the United States, and there has to be fairness shown. Our court system is looking
Exactly. You're not
so
immune.
bad. If you're a
your
Democrat, these
crimes.
are all Democrat appointed people. Biden, Clinton, I think others, 3 people. They seem very good today, and I mean they seem absolutely fine, but I've read and I've heard it's not a friendly panel, but I wasn't surprised
friendly
because I don't get friendly
rapists.
panels. I don't get friendly panels, but where
No,
we've had
you
fair
don't.
judges, where we've had brilliant judges, frankly, I
Yeah.
don't know the judge in Florida, Judge Cannon.
Scum.
Don't know her at all. But
Scumbag.
I think she's a brilliant woman. I think she handled a scam. It's a scam case. That's the documents
you're a
case. That's the
scam.
case where
You're a scam case.
Biden, who had 10 times more documents, took all this stuff for years, 50 years, and he was exonerated. Of course, they said he was incompetent, so he wasn't fit, so he was exonerated based on that. But me, I don't get exonerated so easily, and I had a thing called the Presidential Records Act, which exonerates me, but we won that trial, and the other side plays the Ref Crew and Weissand and all these people. And again, Lisa Monaco should not be involved in this CU. She's been after Trump for years, and now she's like the second person at the DOJ, but she's with all these people, and they're playing the ref. And they say terrible things about judges. They do it with the Supreme Court justices because they think they're going to intimidate them. I think it should be illegal. That's what the DOJ should look into the legality of these people taking a brilliant judge and demeaning her, and taking other people that are fair and solid and demeaning them. It's called playing the ref. Nobody did it better than the late great Bobby Knight, basketball coach. He would scream at those refs and everything and said, they say, Bobby, you're not going to get the decision overturned. Yep, but the next one I will. And he was right. He was a great basketball coach, last coach to have an undefeated season, last coach in basketball to have. And many years ago, he also endorsed me, but he played the ref. These people are playing the ref when they are allowed to call for recusal impeachment of a judge because they're not getting their way. And for some reason, the other side doesn't do that. They don't do that. The other side is much softer. Republicans play it a lot softer, but there they play it legitimately. So I'm going to ask, if I might, will Shar to come up, just say a couple of words about what took place today. One of our attorneys working on this it's a ridiculous case. Remember, it never happened. It was made up for political reasons, and the DOJ is behind everything, every one of these cases. It's political interference. It's a witch hunt, just like the fake Russia scam was a witch hunt, and just like they want to start that scam all over again by announcing that Russia we're talking about. And you know what they do when they do that? They intimidate people from having a fair election. They intimidate poll workers from speaking up when they see crooked things take place in the election, and it's a disgrace. Our country is in serious trouble. Our judicial system is in very serious trouble. Will please come up? Thank you. Then you, Mr. Good morning. Y'all, my name is Will Scharf. I'm one of President Trump's attorneys. Today, we presented oral argument before the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in one of two cases brought against President Trump by Jean Carroll. Now, it's really important to remember that Jean Carroll's story at its heart is an utterly implausible he said, she said story. There is no corroboration for anything she has ever claimed about President Trump. There are no corroborating witnesses. As President Trump alluded to, there is not confirmatory DNA. No police report was filed at the time of this alleged incident. She was unable to identify when this incident occurred until quite recently. No surveillance evidence or witnesses have ever been found or come forward confirming any aspect of Jean Carroll's story. In light of that, in light of the utter implausibility of the story that Jean Carroll was attempting to sell to the jury, in this case her attorneys introduced evidence that should have never seen the inside of a courtroom. Utterly in insane efforts to introduce propensity witnesses Jessica Leeds and Natasha Stoff, most notably in an unfair and improper effort to buttress Jean Carroll's failed attempt to assault President Trump. Jessica Leeds' story is instructive here. This is a woman who claims that in the middle of a crowded airliner in 1979, President Trump assaulted her. Leeds has never been able to identify where this plane departed from, where it went to, the date of the flight in question, making our efforts to disprove her testimony extremely difficult under the federal rules of evidence. This story should have never been allowed to be presented to the jury in this case. The same is true of Natasha Stoff's story, which again lacks any indicia of reliability, any sort of credibility, any sort of confirmatory testimony from other witnesses, or anything else that would make you believe that this actually happened. So on the one hand, you have a judge who allowed in this improper propensity evidence that should not have been allowed, and in our view, that polluted the jury's deliberations in this case, that presented a story to the jury of a series of a pattern of conduct that the jury should not have been considering, and we think that absent that propensity evidence, no fair jury could have reached the verdict that was reached in this case, and as a result, we believe that this verdict needs to be overturned. But there's more than that. In addition to this improper propensity evidence, President Trump and his trial team were prevented from cross-examining Jean Carroll and other witnesses on crucial issues in particular relating to political coordination and the political motivation behind this entire lawsuit. This is a lawsuit that was instigated in large part by George Conway, a longtime political foe and adversary of President Trump. This is a lawsuit that was funded by Reid Hoffman, a key political ally of the Biden-Harris administration and a major Democrat donor. We were limited in the evidence we were allowed to present at trial. About these crucial facts, we were prevented from cross-examining Jean Carroll on aspects of that dynamic that underlies this entire lawsuit and that too unfairly corrupted the jury's deliberations in this case and requires reversal of the jury verdict. I think this political coordination point is particularly important, though it's important to emphasize because what we have seen in the last few years is a weaponization by the Biden administration and by their political allies of our legal system and of our courts to unlawfully, unconstitutionally interfere with President Trump's core First Amendment right to run for president. That is a right guaranteed to him by the Constitution. That is the right that his political opponents are attempting to strip away from him. We have seen this in case after case after case where unfair political motives have underlay what should be serious legal proceedings. And I think when you look at this situation in Toto, when you look at what the left, when you look at what the Biden-Harris administration is attempting to do to President Trump, this is insane. This is an absolute abuse of our legal system. It's an absolute abuse of the rule of law. It should be deeply offensive, not just to political supporters of President Trump, but to each and every American. With respect to today's appeal, we are hopeful that the Second Circuit understands what's at stake here. We are hopeful that the Second Circuit understands what occurred during this trial, which was an improper use of evidence to buttress Jean Carroll's entirely meritless claims on the one hand, and an improper exclusion of evidence that would have informed the jury about the true motivation behind this lawsuit, and that we believe would have resulted in a very different verdict. Thank you. Very good afternoon. I've done this one too many times, actually too many times for the last 3.5 years, while President Trump has been trying to fight to get this country back, and I want to speak to the American women, and I want to speak to the people that need to get out and vote in November 5th. I have sat with President Trump for years now, while he has been targeted with lies, and with judges AGS and DOS who have specifically run in this city and others on getting Trump. The Trump administration will fix this problem. We will stop Kamala Harris's regime because she was there. Let's not forget that. And she still is of using officials from the White House, putting them in DA's offices and AG's offices, and attacking your political opponent. And this country deserves better than this. We should not be sitting here at a press conference talking about this. We did this in 2016 and every woman had no reports. They come out when it's election time, and as a woman who has stood with President Trump, who has spent extensive time with President Trump and with his beautiful family, I will tell you that is not President Trump, and I completely am disgusted by what I have seen happen to this person, his family, and the Trump organization that we stand in right now. You must vote Donald Trump back in, because as an attorney, as a woman, as a mother, our future, this country depends on it, and we need to stop this from happening. The DOJ is supposed to help our country and protect us, not attack us, because you cannot win in the polls. Thank you very much both. And just in finishing this, we have numerous other trials that are also very much in coordination with the DOJ. They actually took just about their top person, and they put them into the offices of the Attorney General of New York, and then also the office of the Dede Bragg's office, to make sure the case is brought viciously against their political opponent. And it's a shame businesses will not come to New York because of it. They actually, in the case of Gorin, they used a consumer frauds case never used before for a thing like this. And not only were my numbers correct, and again, this was a generality, all you need is a general, but I had really good numbers, but they were very conservative, very much on the low side, and the judge knew that, and the judge ruled a fine against me that likes of which has never even been heard of. Businesses will never come to the state as long as that is able to be held up, because we won that trial so conclusively. We had an expert witness said that President Trump's financially, this was an expert witness from the Stern School of Business, one of the most highly respected people in the country. As an expert witness, he said, to the best of my remembering, it's a big statement, but he said this is perhaps the best financial statement I've ever seen. But the judge made me pay like a $400 million fine. This is a consumer fraud statement. Think of it, Cons Consumer Frauds, a case that they made it, and the judge refused to give it over to the commercial division where they could understand things, and they would have dismissed it immediately because this case had no merit whatsoever. The judge wanted to settle the case for a very much smaller amount, and I said, I'm not going to I didn't do anything wrong, but he would have settled the case for a much smaller amount. He wanted to settle it for a much more. We had numerous meetings in his office for a fraction of the number that he gave. That was one of the interesting things. I figured that the worst that you could do is what he wanted to settle for, which was a very small number by comparison. And then he just came out with this number. This was a coordination with the DOJ and the other case that you know about and you've been hearing about, which is same kind of a thing also. In coordination is the Bragg case, and they actually wanted to put them together in New York. They wanted to put the case together with the Attorney General case, but they both wanted credit. They couldn't understand, they both wanted credit, so they had their own cases, and it's very corrupt in New York, and very corrupt. It's a very corrupt place and doing very badly. But when people see what happened, and when they see, I've had so many calls from business people saying this is just terrible. Today there was a story about somebody in Southern District who's highly respected knocking the hell out of both of those cases. Say it's an embarrassment they were allowed to be brought, and I'm going to write out a list of things from Alan DTZ, Andrew McCarthy, Greg Jared, the some of the greatest people, all legal scholars, great people, Jonathan Turley, like 10 highly respected, the most highly respected people that quote Calsey, Judge Calsey. That quote on cases, and I mean, shockingly, they can't even believe it. They said this case should not have been allowed to be brought, and that's about pretty much both cases, but it's about the case that we have in front of Judge Marin. That case is a disgrace, should have never been allowed. I did nothing wrong, and he took a non-existent, long expired by the statute limitations demeanor. He made it into 34 or something more than that counts of felony. Nobody can even believe it over nothing. And if you look at that case, he wouldn't allow it. That whole thing was done by an attorney. I had nothing to do with it. That was done by an attorney, a spag named Michael Cohen, and he did the whole thing. And you're allowed to have reliance on attorney. It's called reliance on attorney. You have a reliance on an attorney. Attorneys allowed to do things, and all it was is a non-disclosure agreement with somebody that said nothing happened. By the way, I might add that if you don't mind, I'll add that we have a statement, nothing happened, and he got a non-disclosure agreement. He did it on his own, and this judge refused to allow us to use that as a defense. The attorney-client defense, which is very standard. Other people have never heard that you're not allowed to use it, but he's the one that did it because I was running for president and running the country. He's the one that did it. So all of these cases are a disgrace. But the case that we had today downtown, I wish we could have mentioned the dress again. Got the idea from Monica Lewinsky, but it was negative. Wasn't allowed to be used. I wish we could have mentioned many of the other things, and I certainly wish we could have gone to CNN and got the outtakes. What's called the outtakes. What did Anderson Cooper tell her during the commercial? I'd love to find that out. So that's where we are. We have a very corrupt system of laws, but in that system we have some very good judges also, and I think in the end the good judges will prevail. And I hope Democrat appointed judges can see a scam like this where somebody just makes up a story probably out of, and he refused to do so. He wanted 2 cases, so 2 cases, 2 sets of lawyers, 2 everything. It's really very disgraceful. Let me talk about job numbers, because as you know, they just came out and they're basic disaster. They are really bad. You had numbers that are shocking. Native-born Americans, we lost 1.3 million jobs, while foreign-born Americans were able to take all of those jobs. So foreigners coming in illegally, largely illegally, into our country took the jobs of native-born Americans. And I've been telling you that's what's going to happen, because we have millions and millions of people pouring into our country, many from prisons and jails and mental institutions and insane asylums, traffickers, human traffickers, women traffickers, sex traffickers, which, by the way, that's the kind of thing that people should be looking at, because it's horrible. And it's turning out that migrant crime is far worse than any crime that we've ever experienced. If you look at Aurora, Colorado, they're taking over the place. They took over buildings, and this is just the beginning. You haven't seen anything yet. You haven't seen any. They've allowed well over 20 million people, in my opinion. Other people say, well, it's only 13. No, it's much more than 20. I think it's much more than 20. Our country is being invaded because of incompetent people like Kamala that doesn't want to do one interview. She does one softball interview with CNN. Couldn't have been nicer. Dana Bash, you know what? I gained respect for Dana Bash and for Jake Tapper, because in my interview with Sleepy Joe, I thought they were very fair. Actually, I was surprised they were very fair. I'm going into very hostile territory shortly on a debate with ABC George Slow Dolos, and that group, and ABC, I think, is the worst of everybody. I think they're the worst. They're the nastiest. They're as bad as you can be. They're worse than NBC, which is saying a lot. And we have something coming, and the reason I'm doing it is because that's the only one that she would do it with, because her best friend is the head of ABC or ABC News, and her husband's best friend is married to that one. So, and Dawn of Brazil is there. You remember the famous Dawn of Brazil? She gave Hillary Clinton the questions. You remember that was a little embarrassing. She got fired, I assume, for that, but now she's working at ABC. So I said I'll do it anyway, because even if she knows the answers and knows the questions, I don't think she'll be very good, and this is not what our country wants, and I feel I have an obligation to do it. And she'd never stand up here like this and give a news conference and speak about what's happening with the weaponization of our justice system. This is the weaponization of justice at a level that nobody's ever seen in this country before. We've never seen it. You see it in third world countries, you see it in banana republics, but you don't see it in the United States of America, and it's a very sad thing. And I think I'm doing a great service by having gone through it and revealing it, because you know it came out with an indictment from the district attorney, which again just revealed today. And I hope you're going to do a story, because it's a big story. The Southern District of New York was, and this is a very highly respected group of people. He said it was a disgrace that case was brought. It was a disgrace that the case was brought in front of Marin. The case is a disgrace, should have never been brought, and the case in front of Judge Lauren. Just in terms of the case itself, we had 4 or 5 overturns in the appellate division. I only hope the appellate division for the good of New York. Other words, you just say God save the state for the good of New York. I hope that the appellate division will do what's right on that case, because that case was a scam. But every single one of these cases that I'm mentioning, they're all hoaxes and scams, no different than Russia, Ukraine. Ukraine, the impeachment hoax number 1, impeachment hoax number 2, all these things that we won them all, but it takes time, it takes effort, and they're at it again. But this time, what they're doing is they're hitting us as hard as possible. You know, it's very interesting. It just brings to light the lawyer on the hoax that we're talking about now, having to do with Jean Carroll. She said the way to defeat Trump is go after him civil as often as possible, make his life miserable, sue him all the time, keep him in court, and let him spend a fortune. That's the lawyer I have in the Jean Carroll case, and that's exactly what they've done. The only thing I can say that's good about it is the public understands, and my poll numbers, I believe, are higher now than they would have been without it, because the public understands it's a hoax, it's a scam, it's a political witch hunt, and some of you should be ashamed of yourselves. Thank you very much, everybody. Applause. English, auto-generated by YouTube. Some typo corrections by lovedreamingpeach. Join me on lovedreamingpeach.com. Before listening to this near incoherent, rambling, awful so-called defense, just be aware that the reason there were 2 cases against him from Jean Carroll was not, as he claims, for publicity, but because he defamed her after he lost the first case. He continued to defame her. I think it's possible she may bring a 3rd case now because he defamed her again in this speech. Although she is 80 years old and has already been awarded $88 million combined, although she hasn't seen a penny yet because Trump is holding the money up in another appeal, which is sure to lose. Just note Jean Carroll was already rich when they met, and she has no need for his money nor publicity about this awful, horrific situation where he raped her in a Bergdorf Goodman store dressing room.
lovedreamingpeach.com